Hello, my name is Roman Gingiashvili, and this is the lecture and DVD about the general approach in the openings and what should help you a great deal regardless what opening you play. Before we even start discussing it, I want to let you know that opening is not a combination of moves and to put it together, it's idea that's been played in the early stage of the game together with all the basic principles and idea that is must be very carefully followed, and make sure you don't get carried away and make some moves, some idea comes to your head in early stage that has nothing to do with this opening. Now, what we have to do is go carefully with examples of it. For example, the opening, I'm trying mostly, not entirely of course, mostly reflect the openings I was recommending. I did recommend knight f3, knight c6, d4, ed, bishop c4. There is no strategical line yet because we don't even know what is the opening yet. Knight f6, that's the most common move. We are not going to be discussing the openings, we're going to be discussing the positions after the openings. e5, d5, bishop b5, knight e4, knight takes d4, bishop d7, bishop takes c6, bc, and now we castled. Bishop e7, f3, knight g5, f4, knight e4. Now, in this position, theory thinks best move is f5. I don't agree with it. I think the best move is knight c3. But let's look at this position. Before we get the double pawns, you have to know, basically, in this opening, one of two basic strategies has to be played. One of them is blockade d4 and c5 squares, for example. If black played bishop c5, for example, we would have played f3, f4, then bishop e3, play knight d2, and our strategy is to dominate d4 and c5 squares. For example, like this, knight c5, and eventually something like bishop d4. Now we're dominating this blockade. This is very strategical plan. But sometimes black won't let us do that. What I mean by this is black will not go bishop c5 in this position, but they will go bishop e7. Now plan with blocking dark squares on d4 and c5 is going to backfire because black's bishop does not block c pawn. So after bishop e7, f3. Now this plan doesn't work. That means there will be no blockade. The second plan, as I already mentioned, we have two plans, and one of them should work. If neither of those plans worked, you must have done something wrong. Unless, of course, your opponent does something critically wrong and loses the game in the early stage. But you have to create king side attack, pushing f4 and f5. Now, after f3, knight g5, f4, knight e4. Here, knight c3 is very strong move. Now, let me see how this move goes with the plan of attacking on king side. If we know that our plan should be attacking the king side, we cannot forget also the basic principles. Development. Plan remains the same. That's the way you should think. Plan remains the same. But on the other hand, you cannot play the game with a knight on b1 and bishop on c1. One more thing is that knight on e4 is very powerful. So we play knight c3. The question is, why don't we play knight d2? There's a very good answer to this. When you attack on one side of the board, it's very natural that your opponent will try play on the opposite side of the board. And you see, I already mentioned it on the opening DVD, here, this pawn structure, a2, b2, c2, is not nearly as good as double pawns on c-file. Double pawns on c-file favor white. They favor white a great deal. The reason for it is we have to look what happens after knight d2, knight, bishop takes, c5, and now after we retreat, black can go d4 and put the bishop on c6. Black is going to have very strong position, for example on f5, bishop c6, followed by queen d5. That's why we play knight c3. And now after c5 we go knight b3, and now it's very difficult for black to push the d pawn. You see, in order for your attack be successful, you have to do something about counterattack too, or your opponents cannot move. Now, why don't we go knight e2 here? Knight e2 move is not good. Not that good, because now black can play bishop b5, and you will see if we go f5, now can go queen d7, they are doing okay. It's difficult for white to make progress. However, if we play knight b3, bishop b5 is not good, because we can go rook e1, followed by bishop e3, and c5 pawn is going to be in jeopardy. If black moves, then they block their own bishop. So black should play c4, then we come back to knight d4, and if black goes c5, then we play knight e2. As you can tell, bishop on b5 now is totally meaningless. On bishop f5, we're going to go knight g3. Black is in serious trouble. And after knight e2, white has good attacking chances after putting knight on g3 and going f5, which going f5 first, maybe even knight g3 first. Either way, white has very strong position. So when you get this position, before even you got to this position, after your last move, castling, you should know that you should be able either block black's center and d4 and c5 squares, or organize attack on the king side. And if black plays bishop e7, you know it's going to be very hard, nearly impossible, to block d4 and c5 squares, and it's a lot easier with bishop on c5. So we have to try to organize king side attack. And all we are concentrating now is on the best way of doing it. Now, we don't want to go knight f3 because bishop is going to go to f5, and we have our own pawn structure blocked. And knight e2, we don't want to go because bishop is going to go to b5, and this supposedly bad bishop is going to be very active. So we're going knight b3, threatening again with a blockade and also attacking d5 pawn. And if black goes c4, knight d4 and c5. Then after knight e2, white has serious advantage. Well, you may ask, why can't he go now bishop f5? Then it's knight g3. Blockade doesn't hold. But if black goes bishop g4, we can simply go h3, and after taking on e2, d4 is not possible because black is going to lose a pawn, and if black castles, we go f5, and there goes our pawn storm on the king side. Black has very difficult position. Now, so on the opening DVD, we may not be able to cover all these moves, all these positions, but what is going to help you a great deal, if you know very well what your plans are, you think logically, oh, those are my plans, and what is the best way of me following? How can I get the best of my plan? How can I do the best way to make my plan work? Active piece, passive piece, exchanging. Not this way, but this way, because double pawns stop black's pawn storm in the center, which is a counterplay to white's king side attack. And after this, white has very strong attack. Now, first opportunity they have, they will go f5, and on c4, knight d4, c5. Knight doesn't go to f3 because of bishop f5. Well, and not only because of that, because knight is a lot more active on e2, because it's going to g3, support f5, and black has very difficult game. Now, next example is from our way of playing Grand Prix, and this is very, very instructive example. Knight c3, knight c6, f4, g6. As we know, black has many options to play here, and after bishop b5, there is move e6, which is very bad move. Well, very bad move, but it's not going to be bad unless you know how should you play against it. Bishop takes c6, and let's discuss b takes c. We go d3, d5, e5, knight e7, castle, castle. In my opinion, this position is nearly lost for white. And you should know why. The main reason why black's position is lost is the c8 bishop. And here we go knight a4. Protecting this c5 pawn is pretty bad, because after queen a5 and white's c4, black is nearly hopeless. After b3, we will go, for example, on rook d8, we can go queen c2, make sure that queen is not on the way of the rook, and whatever black does, we're going to go b3, followed by bishop a3. Black is absolutely hopeless. On knight f5, we may go bishop d2 even first, and bring rook on e1. Eventually, c5 pawn is lost. But that's obvious positional disaster for black. Let's discuss c4 move. And this is very, very instructive. We know, and I already just mentioned, that main thing black has nearly lost position is bishop on c8. In this position, Ripka recommends d takes c, giving white an advantage, and I agree with that. But I absolutely urge you not to make this move. You see, if there is anything lacking in understanding positions with Ripka or with any engine in this matter, is static positions. Ripka fails to realize how bad will be the bishop on c8 after d4. After d4, black is totally lost. Our next move is going to be c3. For example, if black tries bishop a6, we're going to go c3. Later, we're going to put the knight on c5. There is no need for it yet. We have to realize that black has absolutely no plan. As you can see, black can absolutely do nothing on a queen side. Center is completely blocked, and white has big space advantage on a king side. Besides, well, normally with 8 pawns on board, bishops are not good pieces to have, and here they are the worst. Absolute, based on the pawn structure, both bishops are nearly worthless. What is white's plan? How does white win? How do we want to win? We don't want to play on queen side, because that is gonna, for example, black plays here. That is gonna open black's bishop. No, we are not gonna do that. We never want to do that. Where we want to win on the king side. And how do we play? Well, let me suggest one plan, and believe me, there is more than one plan here. Bishop e3, on knight f5, bishop f2. We wanted to go bishop f2 anyway. Even suppose black stands and does nothing. There is almost a formula how to win this position. we go bishop f2. Just to give you an idea, we cannot predict every move your opponent is going to make, but bishop h4, well, rook e8, suppose, then h3. Why h3? Because we want to transfer our knight to g4. We want to put knight on g4. If black goes h5, you have a luxury of choosing one of good plans, either go g4 or go knight f3 and mount your knight on g5. Eventually you're going to go g4 and all the weak squares and totally disabled black's pieces will pay off for white. This position is absolutely hopeless. g4 is going to go, well, whatever black plays, g4 is going to go, and eventually then we don't want to go g5. We're going to go knight g5, king g2, rook h1. Position is hopeless. You know, I understand that I moved black's pieces back and forth aimlessly, but believe me, there is not much else to do for black in this position. And this is very instructive to understand. Now, if we go back to the position where Rivka recommended here, d takes c, because Rivka fails to realize hopelessness of black's bishop. When d takes c is winning a pawn, that she realizes very quickly, and normally her technique is good enough to win this game after winning the pawn, and that's where her judgment is coming from. But we are humans, only thing we have on our side, maybe a little more superior than computers, is understanding statics of the position. That's why d4 must be played. Game is going to be long, but believe me, if you don't do anything terrible, you don't have to play this perfectly, this position. Just don't do anything terrible. The game is one-sided. Only one side plays, the other side watches. One side makes all the progress, the other side makes none. Position is hopeless. Well, this is your plan. Your plan is to totally disable black's bishop and bring your dark square bishop on a only diagonal. After we play c3, only way you can use it, this bishop is on this diagonal, on h4. The other good diagonal is a3, maybe even better. But we don't want to play this diagonal because then we have to open his bishop also. But we want position with no counterplay. This is zero counterplay and zero hope for black as well. Now let's talk about one interesting position in Caro-Kann. What I was recommending in Caro-Kann, simple system to play and easy to adapt, is exchange variation followed by c3. And there are several ways black can develop. They can go knight f6, they can go e6. Well, let's look at g6. And again, we are not covering the opening itself. We're just covering logical approach to the opening. Well, after g6, We don't know what black wants to do. We go knight f3. Sometimes they want to play bishop h6. Well, if the bishop h6, your plan here is so you can take or you can let your opponent take, castling, and then on knight f6 go rook e1, maybe queen h6, and then knight d2, knight f1, knight g3. Basically play in the center, concentrate on the center and the king side. But that's not what I want to discuss now. After g6, white plays knight f3, bishop g7, castle, knight h6. Okay. Black has very clear plan, rook e1, and after castle, we continue like nothing happened, knight d2, because black may want to play bishop f5, then we can go knight b3 or even knight f1, putting on g3. This is quiet position, slightly better for white, nothing serious, but it's easy to play. However, black may choose to go f6. f6 contains the idea that if white is not careful, they may have a very difficult position. For example, knight f1, knight f7, and if they just simply develop, they may get hit by e5 and experience very big problems. There is a rule. As soon as your opponent plays f6, and before they are ready to go e5, and they may be ready to go right now, the first thing immediately what white has to do is to go c4. Now e5 will never work because we're going to take cd, bishop c4, and create serious problems for black. e5 is not good, d5 is coming. Black has very difficult position with artificially placed pieces on f7 and g7. So on the other hand, if black goes e6, we can go knight b3 here, preparing maybe knight c5, and after knight f7, bishop f4, and after g5, well, we can even take on d5, go bishop g3. Symmetrical pawn structure, what you cannot compare activity and placement of the pieces for white and black. Beautiful bishop on d3, terrible bishop on g7, okay bishop on c8, very nice bishop on g3, and plus white's rook is better placed. So there is nothing in this position in black's favor. There are several things that I already mentioned in the white's favor. So very frequently when we have strategy, sometimes our strategy says, most of the time, what we want to do. Here our strategy is to go knight f1, knight g3, put the bishop on f4, but here after f6, the situation changed. Black just jeopardized their king position. Black just made pawn weakness on f6, blocking their pieces, but black is preparing very strong activity in the center. Now we're changing the plan. That wasn't part of our strategy. but that's a logical approach. So you logically come to conclusion. My opponent wants to dominate in the center. I have to stop him. And I also want to open center because knight on h6 and bishop on g7 will look very silly. Well, in this position, we wouldn't think about move like c4, but because move like c4 does nothing but creates weakness for us. See, it's a big difference. And one move later, this is very powerful move that guarantees white very solid advantage. Well, the idea is general in these openings, in these types of pawn structures. Let me show you. Well, there is completely different opening and completely different pawn structure for now. But you have to know when white castles, for example, black goes bishop d3, d5, cd, ed, knight e2, and rook e8. Every time, if this happens, suppose black goes bishop g4 to play bishop h5 and bishop g6, on f3 must be played c5. Same thing, you have to do everything to stop white from moving e4. Now e4 is not going to be very easy to play. Later black is going to go bishop g6, move f3, but here it's okay for white. In the example that we saw, that was for black. If black does that, it's, well, I would say that playing f6 in a similar, with a similar type of the idea after knight e2, it may turn out to be very bad idea. This position is already very difficult for black. Black prepares e5, white goes c4. In Nimzo, white prepares e4, black goes c5. This is the common thing. It's like a best antidote to your opponent's active plan. So that's how you dismantle it, and that's how you make your opponent pay for the weaknesses they make. Now I want to show you a few more examples of logical thinking. This should help you. This is not DVD about various different openings. No, it's about way of thinking in the opening, because we are not able to remember every move in every opening, and even if we did, it won't help us, because likely we're gonna face some moves that are out of the openings, and away from the openings, your opponent made some move that he thought it's an interesting new idea, or maybe he made the new move because he didn't know what the right and old move is. But always logical thinking and evaluating and assessing what this move does, what it doesn't do, well, whether this makes sense or not, and how can we take advantage of it, and what is the logical response to it. Let me give you a few examples, couple of mine, couple of not mine. Well, but this is one example. c4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, g3, c6, d4, e takes d, queen takes d4, d5. I'm white, my opponent is black, bishop g2, bishop e6, cd, knight takes d5, knight f3. Well, here, if knight takes knight, then we can play queen takes c3, which creates little difficulties for black to develop because of g7 pawn. My opponent played queen b6. He wanted to exchange queens. After castling, he wants to exchange queens in order to develop his f8 bishop. Exchanging queens by taking on d4 is a bad positional mistake. And why? Knight takes d4. It's wrong to assess this position as an endgame position. This is not an endgame position. Only queens are off the board. And when only queens are off the board, most of the time it's not an endgame position. Correct move was knight d7, continue developing. Maybe later knight f6 and try to develop the r-square bishop, but after queen takes d4, knight takes d4, knight takes c3, bc. Now I think black is lost. The big problem is b7 pawn. Now when white goes rook b1, what to do with b7 pawn? It's very difficult for black to defend here, and they lost very quickly. This is a bad idea, bad concept. Sometimes when you want to exchange queens and go to endgame, the position you're going to get to may not be the endgame. Bad plan, a lot of weaknesses, and a total disaster for black. Bishop c5, rook b1. b7 pawn is hanging. You cannot go b6 because knight takes c6, and you cannot go bishop b6 because even bishop a3 will be strong. a4 is very good. There is no real defense against a5. So black played bishop takes d4, cd, and b6. But now white has two bishops, very powerful center after e4, and black is almost hopeless. a4, castle, bishop f4, rook d8, rook fd1. And black here played knight d7 and just gave c6 pawn because there are practically no moves. On bishop d7 we're going to go e4. And things are getting a lot worse. Now let's go back to this. We don't need to see the end of that game. Let's go back to that position. So you got to the bad position. My opponent says that bishop cannot be developed. But exchanging queens, he didn't have any defensive plan in mind because he didn't realize how bad it's going to be. So what to do here? What's the best defense? We can find very frequently, we can find ourselves in some kind of bind that we have difficulties to complete development. We have to make the best effort to get out of it. Knight d7, as I already mentioned, is the best move. And now black next move, well, suppose white goes rook d1. They have to play maybe knight, this knight or the other knight, probably the d5 knight to f6, trying to play bishop c5, and they have playable position. Terrible plan, queen takes d4, puts them immediately in lost position. That's how a logical move. Sometimes they want to play queen takes d4. Now, how can you tell in this position that, well, let me tell you, this is very bad move, and because queen takes g7, it's obvious to see. But you know, this is even worse. And my opponent failed to understand that, and logically, black is completely lost here. It's very good example how sometimes playing quickly, and he said, okay, well, in this position, he says, I have little difficulties in unwinding my pieces. Let me exchange queens. And he went there and practically without thinking exchanged queens. Without thinking, he got position, type of position that you normally get without thinking. And black is totally lost here. Very good and instructive example, but I'm sure my opponent was good enough if he put a little more thought in the position and says, okay, after I exchange queens, how would I finish development? He was never able to finish development without losing a pawn, even after exchanging queens. And this is careless and thoughtless approach to the opening stage of the game. Next example will show you something about pawn structure. Actually, when you talk about plans, if you realize that most of the plans in chess are based on the pawn structure. Well, sometimes pawn structure is static, sometimes it's dynamic, and it's very important, maybe one of the most important concepts in the opening, to realize, to know difference between from one pawn structure to another. This game was played by me against strong international master many years ago, 40 years ago exactly. Not much changed since then as positional understanding. A lot changed in the openings. So this example will be very, very instructive. Knight f3, knight f6, g3, g6, bishop g2, bishop g7. Complete symmetry so far. c4, c6, d4, d5, cd, cd, knight c3. This opening also popular today, and one of the moves is knight e4 and bishop f4, rather rare continuation, and knight takes c3, bc, knight c6, and rook e1. Now let's talk about this position. This position is all about pawn structure. White has backwards pawn on c3. White has weak square on c4, possibly for knight. This those are the main main concepts black has to play for. They could have gone knight a5, or maybe bishop f5, stopping e4. Actually, one of the white plans here to go e4 and to try to get an activity. And this is a very, it's almost equal position. And black made one move, b6. This is absolutely horrible move, because this completely changes course of the game. Well, black wants to play obviously bishop a6. For example, on something rook c1, maybe bishop a6, followed by knight a5, and they had right idea. The execution is terrible, and we have here one time opportunity to play c4. That's what happened in the game. And now black cannot take on c4 because of knight e5, puts them in very bad position. They're going to lose material, and they cannot do that, and they had to play e6, and after cd ed we have complete change of scenery. Eventually black lost the game. I played rook c1, and well, there is no c4 square, because c4 square, for example, in this position, if knight comes to c4, it's good when there is a pawn in front of it on c3, and black has some pressure later on queenside. Now black has very weak pawn on d5 they have to worry about, and positionally is 3 island versus 2, 1 island, 2 islands, and 3 islands versus 2 islands for white. Weak pawn on d5 and activity of white's pieces. I could have even gone immediately knight e5, getting an advantage. So black got very bad positions. We don't have to see the game, but that's how, when you get careless, you know, all black has there, black is behind in development, all black has there, this pawn structure, the backward c3 pawn. Under no circumstances black should allow white to play c4 without losing the pawn. Well, maybe even bishop e6, make sure c4 is not on the menu. Well, I could have played e4, or maybe, and on d takes e, maybe knight g5, followed by knight takes e4. That could have been possible, but it does not. It still gives black grip on white squares, grip in the center. Instead, after b6, all they got in the center now is a worry. They have to worry about the d5 pawn, and they have pretty bad position. And if white plays e3, bishop on g7 is totally unemployed, and black has nothing but problems. That's how one careless move b6 can change the character of the game, totally evaluation of the position, and black got very, very bad game. Sometimes you can see that your opponent is overly aggressive in the opening. Actually, that happens quite often. And overly aggressive plans normally suppose in the opening they're supposed to fail, because as the basic rule teaches us, you have to develop the pieces and then prepare for attack. But sometimes a black, one side or another, most frequently white, they try to start attacking from very early stages of the game. Here is one example. Quiet opening, such as Queen's Gambit declined. Actually, I played like this. Well, I never played in a tournament, but I played like this sometimes in blitz games. And in the blitz games, it's very difficult to take advantage of it for black. Well, Queen C2, well, Knight D7 is one of the moves. And Castle is the other move. Well, suppose we castle. White goes Queen C2. Now, this is not something you can take advantage of because Queen C2 is a normal move that it's not played in this move order. Probably they play E3, Bishop D3, and then Queen C2. But Queen C2, we should go probably Knight D7. And now White may castle. I've had this position several times, actually many times, with White. This is dangerous position to misplay. If you don't play here correctly, you may end up in a very, very bad position. The one plan that is okay is DC, E4, and Knight B6. But I don't like this plan nearly as much as I like C5 plan. After castling, C5. We have to open the position by being timid and careful playing C6. We're going to look at it in the later stage of it. We're going to get bad game. But after C5, we want now to take on D4 and go E5 and activate center before White gets something serious. Well, E4 is the only move in this position that makes sense, that is logical. That's what White played, castling long anyway, and that's when they castle, that's their main idea. That's why they delay E3. And now they play E4. And after E4, C takes D, Knight takes D4, and E5, Knight F5, D4. That gives black very, very good position. Now, Knight D5 is not possible because Knight takes D5. And if Knight takes E7, Queen takes E7, Knight D5. Black can simply play, I don't know, Queen D6 even, or Queen C5. Even Queen C5 is okay, but Queen D6 is pretty good. And black has an advantage. There is no attack for white here. And pawn on D4 is very strong. And white's king is more likely to be attacked soon than black's. White's king right now is almost exposed, and all we need to do to get bishop out of c8 and go b5. So, okay, well, now this is a good example. And this is very important to play actively, either DC, which I like less than c5, but c5 is real strong. Now to show you why wrong approach may end in a disaster. For example, black continues to play what is the normal move in these types of positions. C6, and to prepare for d takes c, and b5 and b4. This is quite common response to this in this opening. But after e4, position becomes very dangerous for black. d, knight takes c4. And it's interesting, the c6 is the most played moves in my games. My opponent mostly played c6. Well, that is in blitz games, but it's still knight takes c4, bishop takes c7, queen takes c7, queen takes c4. Black has bad game now. First of all, they have problem developing the c8 bishop. Something like knight f6 will be met by queen h4. And now I've had them play b5 against me, b6, even c5. And on all three moves, there is universal response. Bishop d3. That cannot be played because bishop takes h7 and unprotected queen can be disastrous. And if black goes rook e8 or h6, it doesn't matter, white responds the same way. g4, threatening g5. Same thing will happen on h6. g4. Now g5 is a big time threat. Maybe even more accurate is after h6, c5, totally disabling the c8 bishop. But basically g4 plan, even after knight d5, queen g3, will give white big advantage. Knight e5 is coming. Black has very bad game here. And if not b5, well, suppose they play c5, bishop d3 on an h6, g4, c takes d, g5. This position is already, it's almost over. This is so bad. Well, just to give you a couple of examples that what happened. On knight h7, bishop h7 wins a piece because king cannot take because of g6 and black's queen is lost. And if knight goes to d7, then rook g1, and you see now on something like b6, if they, well, we can simply take and there is a checkmate by force. It just shows you how dangerous this position may be. So the only way to prevent this is kind of attack white gets powerful attack without much preparation. And what preparation can we talk about when there's only 7 moves made in the game? The correct approach, c5 immediately. This is a distraction from white's attacking plan, quickly opening position. White has more space, they want to open position. The only thing is we have to initiate counterplay in its center quickly. On something like cd, we can go ed, and on c, I don't know, we can go h6 here, and we don't need to get this pawn back right away. When we develop, when game develops, you know, I don't know, we can go even here and go rook c8 or bishop takes c5. With a pawn down, you see we're gonna have an attack rather than defending. So the correct approach, it's very important in the openings, in various different openings, to have counterattack in the center. You have to stabilize your center and otherwise you may get swept away after e4. Well, this position is already quite unpleasant for black. It's just mildly put. It may even be worse than that. As we already mentioned, that pawn structure has a lot to do with our planning for the middle game after the opening. And if we had to say what's the most common pawn structure positions we have to know, most common pawn structure. Obviously, and I don't think anyone can doubt it, that most common pawn structure is with isolated pawn. Well, pawn structure with isolated pawn may come out from various different openings. They come out from Caro-Can, and when eventually it's taken, there's isolated pawn. We can get this position come out from Queen's Gambit declined, from Tarrasch defense, and eventually there's another position. It can come out from even English, Grunfeld, and you name it, from almost every opening. Well, what should we know about the pawn structure positions? Well, I can tell you this. The pawn structure positions very difficult to assess because one movement of a piece, if one piece stands on a little bit different square, it may make whole difference in the world. But how do we know? How can we tell these differences? Well, we cannot even talk about these differences before we talk about the basis of isolated pawn structure positions. Bases are such that side with isolated pawn should stay away from exchanging pieces, from simplifying positions, and side, the other side should try the opposite, obviously. And very frequently, one side or another, they go wrong. Actually, they go wrong, I would say, more frequently than they don't. And I am talking about all levels, including the highest levels, because they are very difficult position to play. But let's talk about some common mistakes. And I have here very interesting game to bring you a common mistakes. Actually, 2 games where I can bring you common mistakes made by the side with an isolated pawn. d4, d5, edc, dc4, knight f6, knight c3, e6, knight f3, bishop b4. Now, this is very popular move in these positions, and white has several responses. And one of them is c takes d. Okay, as a rule, the symmetrical pawn structure is always favors white, because white bishop on d3 placed very well, bishop on c8 doesn't have a good square, because on bishop g4 maybe queen a4 check and knight e5. So, and the next move, white may go h3. So the most frequently they take with the knight. And this is correct move. This is like one of the continuations. I'm going to show you now the typical mistakes. Queen c2, knight c6, bishop d3. Now, instead of playing correctly h6 and castling, or knight f6 followed by castle, those are the correct plans. Or even bishop a5 move here, theoretical, is okay. In one of the games that I saw, and I played this also for white, black went pawn hunting. This move surely wins a pawn, because pawn takes c3, knight takes d4. This definitely wins a pawn. Now queen a4 check doesn't do anything, because after simple b5 even, you know, if queen takes on b4, knight takes f3 followed by queen takes d3, this is the move. Or after knight takes d4, knight takes d4 is the best move for white. And now if queen takes d4, this position is very bad for black, although they won material. Now that's how you should not be distracted with immediate material win, falling yourself far behind in development. After castling, black must take the other pawn on c3, and after bishop b5 check, this is one move, and after queen takes c3, bishop b5 check, bishop d7 can be played. Well, in this position, it looks like black is safe, because on castle, queen takes c3, bishop b5, bishop d7, or maybe even king f8. But this position, after winning the pawn, is really bad, because white goes check right away. Now bishop d7 simply loses, because bishop takes d7, and if queen takes d7, white takes the bishop, and if king takes d7, then queen a4, and white is going to take bishop with the queen very next move. So black's best chance is to play king f8, and then castle, and after queen takes c3, now queen e4. It's a very difficult position to defend. Now they are way behind in development. Rook b1 is coming next, well, and followed by bishop b2, rook b1 and bishop b2. Well, I don't want to spend much time on analyzing this position. This position is almost lost. Take my word for it, and if you want to double check on any of the engines you may have, you will see that I am telling the truth here. So let's go back to this is one common mistake. Don't go pawn hunting. You have space disadvantage and development disadvantage. So the only thing is for black is weak d4 pawn. So you have to complete development as quick as possible. The other move for white, besides cd is one move, and bishop d3 is the other move. And we're gonna see now a lot more common mistake played by black. This was played between two very strong players, over 2,500, and let's see what happened. After d takes c, bishop takes c4, knight c6, castling, bishop g5, bishop e7, rook e1, b6, a3, bishop b7, queen d3. This is critical position. As I said, white is not supposed to exchange pieces because they have to play for attack, and also black has problem with the space on the board, and the more pieces they exchange, obviously the easier it's going to be for them to play. So based that principle, black played knight d5, which is pretty bad move. It's bad move, and here is the contradiction of facts, because white exchanges a lot of pieces. But I just said that white is not supposed to exchange a lot of pieces. But the difference here is that after knight d5, bishop takes d5, ed, bishop takes e7, knight takes e7. The difference is that there is no more isolated pawn. Pawns are symmetrical. Bishop on b7 is very bad, and white quickly takes advantage of the e-file after rook e3. But before we go on with the game, I want to show you, well, it's easy to say that knight d5 is a bad move, but what should black play here? Knight a5, white will go bishop a2, and bishop takes f3. White will play queen takes f3, and white has pretty big advantage because queen takes d4 loses to b4 move, and after knight c4, knight b5, black loses a piece. So that's not playable. Then you cannot give the bishop on f3, and this position is also bad. What is the correct move? So we know we cannot exchange pieces for black if we get a symmetrical pawn structure, because our bishop is going to be bad. But how to conclude development? How to stop potential d5 in future? The answer is h6. Now this is very, very instructive, because if white plays, for example, bishop f4, then knight a5 is okay, and after bishop a2, knight d5, black is doing just fine. White cannot force black to move the e pawn to d file. But what happens on bishop h4? There comes a big difference now. We can go knight a5, and after bishop a2, bishop takes f3. White doesn't want to take with a pawn, and after queen takes f3, queen takes d4. The bishop is hanging on h4, and b4 move is not making any sense here. And if bishop takes, then bishop takes, and now after b4 also c3, knight is hanging. So this is not playable for white. So often in a position with a space disadvantage, you have to use some concrete calculation to make your pieces, to put your pieces in the right square and to simplify, to exchange pieces without making damage to your position. Knight d5 certainly didn't answer to these demands. Bishop takes d5, ed, bishop takes e7, knight takes e7, and after rook e3, f6, rook a, e1. This is very good player played for black as well. Now after rook f7, knight d2, queen d7. This is typical. Knight d2 is a very good move because in this position you see the pawn on f6 and restricts white's knight from activity. Knight d2, queen d7, knight f1. White wants to play knight g3, and after knight f1, rook a to f8, knight g3, f5, f4. This is pretty bad position. e5 square is weak. A terrible bishop on b7, and white has uncontested control on e-file, and slowly black lost the game. Very, very good example how to deal with isolated pawn positions, and this is one of my favorite classical example of importance of h6 move. Again, on bishop f4, knight a5, and knight d5, and white has enough control, enough piece control on d5, and on h6, bishop h4, then knight a5, and bishop takes f3, taking advantage of bishop's placement on h4, followed by queen takes d4, and black is doing just fine. Black is just pawn up for no compensation. When you play opening and you see, you know what the idea. Okay, now how can we find the h6 move? He said, oh, maybe it's too complicated. Well, it's not very easy, but you know what you need to do. You have to find a way to make it work. I don't want to go knight d5 because, as it happened in the game, I'm going to have bad pawn structure, which is symmetrical, but in a case of bishop on b7, it makes it bad for black, and also control of e-file. That gives solid advantage for white. So we have to, we cannot go knight d5, knight a5, bishop a2, we cannot take on f3, and then have control on d5. So we have to, maybe we try rook c8, but it's only extension for one move, because after bishop a2, you still have to solve the same problems, and they are not easy to deal with. And because on knight, anytime on knight d5, there is bishop is going to take on d5, which will create the same problems. Now, if bishop takes g5, maybe bishop e4, followed by d5. Generally, those positions are bad for black. But h6 move makes white to decide where the bishop is going to go, and then they have concrete solution to solve all their problems. Very instructive example. I was always saying how important it is to know the opening, that opening is supposed to be your window to middle game, and it's supposed to outline your plans for middle game. But just knowing openings is not enough. It's very important, and maybe even more important, to know very deep and believe religiously in the ideas behind these openings, what their goal is. For example, as we looked at last example, that black supposed to neutralize pressure without changing pawn structure, and white has to try the opposite. Well, you have to know the ideas. This way, even you forget concrete moves, as long as you stay within the idea, you're gonna be okay. The ideas and choosing the right plan based on concrete, on concrete approach, and as well as on common logic, will help you a great deal to improve in the opening and in general as a player. So I really advise you to follow these principles, and I guarantee you will improve as chess player. Thank you very much, and see you soon.